And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominick, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, do birthdays in your 40s mean your existential crisis now only occurs once a year? And with Twitter now no longer preserving deleted content, how will I be able to doom scroll Glenn Greenwald's timeline? And now, the podcast host who leaves all personal content online, especially when it involves a backyard animal invasion, Pete Dominick!
Thank you, Pete Co, and happy birthday to you. Yesterday was Pete's birthday, and hopefully you wished him a happy one. Thank you for all of the great contributions that you give us each and every day. And thank you for pressing play, for downloading and subscribing to Stand Up. I've got an excellent show. Joining me today is veteran and author Matt Gallagher, who is just back from Ukraine, and he was there training civilians, combat, and so much more. And it was a really interesting conversation that I have with him. The rare one-guest show. I normally have two great guests, but I had all kinds of scheduling issues and cancellations. It was a bit stressful on the Wednesday trying to make it happen, but I'm glad that I got to talk with Matt as long as I did. He's got a great piece in Esquire about his trip to Ukraine, which of course I've linked to. So that is coming up. But Pete brings up a good point about backyard animals, because I wanted to ask folks, what if any surveillance system do they use and have? I'm not as concerned about our own personal safety in the community, although, you know, with me getting more involved in local politics, if somebody's going to throw some trash on my lawn or something like that, I certainly would love to catch their license plate on camera. But I've got an old system. I want to upgrade my home surveillance system, and I know they sell them at the Costco's and stuff, so maybe we'll talk about that tomorrow night, rather tonight, at the Hangout. I forgot it's tonight at tonight's Hangout. But if you've got a like one of those surveillance system with like 4 or more cameras, I'm interested because I do want to catch the animals. That's what I want it for. I want to catch the animals getting into the gardens, because believe it or not, even with 2 fences, sometimes they get in, especially the little ones, and I really want to prevent them from eating my garden because I'm not growing it for them. So let me know what you use, if anything. And does everybody have that Ring doorbell but me? I mean, some of you are worried about being spied upon, and I don't blame you. You don't use the smartphones, the smart homes and all that, the Alexas and so on. But if you do, you should be asking it to play Stand Up with Pete Dominick. That should work on your smart home, whatever you've got, in a Google or an Alexa. We'll talk about all of that. I think I'll bring that up at the Hangout tonight. I hope to see you there at tonight's stand-up community happy hour hangout. That's tonight at 8 o'clock. If you're a subscriber, you should be getting an email. If you're not getting that email, maybe your credit card expired. A couple of you mentioned that. That was the issue because I brought it up yesterday. So make sure your credit card is still active so that your subscription is still active. You get the email. You get the vitamin N every day as well. A great shot from the Arizona desert from Mike Wolfson today. A couple shots from the Emerald Isle where Mindy Cunningham and her family have been for the last couple of days. And keep the email coming. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Yesterday, I asked for people to write a liner, a jingle, something for me to say to introduce the last 24 segment, and this is what Phil Round came up with. The regular news can be such a bore. Not so with Stand-Up's last 24. Thanks, Phil. Can we do any better than that? Here we go. All right, folks, this is what I have been paying attention to today, as I'm always punching in and out of the news, collecting, aggregating as much sound and headlines as I can for you in this first segment of the show. No daily podcast does it better than me, at least not as thoroughly and as robustly and comprehensively as I do. I love to use those 3 words interchangeably, by the way, if you haven't noticed. So let's get to it. What do I got for you? Let's start with the WTF just happened today email by Matt Visor, who says, welcome to day 442 of the Biden administration, and writes in his today in one sentence intro, which I love, and today covers a few things I didn't even know about. He writes, the U.S. imposed new sanctions on Russia's largest financial institution, its largest private lender, and Putin's adult children. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs warned that the potential for significant international conflict is increasing, not decreasing. I played that for you yesterday. The January 6th committee obtained emails belonging to Trump's lawyer. A Virginia state court has disbarred an attorney who represented several high-profile January 6th defendants. The bipartisan $10 billion COVID-19 relief bill has stalled in the Senate after Republicans blocked the measure from moving forward, and 37% of registered voters said Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas should definitely recuse himself from any cases related to the 2020 presidential election. That is from the WTF Just Happened Today email. Well, let me start with some sound for you. I've always got a nice sampling, like a sampler. Like you've got, the appetizers, like a meat and cheese olive, or maybe a fruit or vegetable sampler. That's what I have, but it's important sound from the last 24 hours, including this. President Biden continuing what we talked yesterday with Stephen Greenhouse about unionizing the labor movement where it's at. Of course, Friday workers at an Amazon warehouse in New York were on. Wow, it sounded like I just had a stroke in my throat only. Workers at New York's Staten Island Amazon warehouse voted overwhelmingly to join the Amazon Labor Union. And so here was President Biden taking advantage of that and trying to harness that momentum when speaking yesterday at the National Conference of North America's Building Trades Unions. I wonder who books that. Anyway, here he is talking on Wednesday, expressing and support for efforts to unionize Amazon workers.
That's what unions are about, in my view, about providing dignity and respect for people, plus their neck. That's why I created the White House Task Force on Worker Organization Empowerment, to make sure the choice to join a union belongs to workers alone. And by the way, Amazon, here we come.
Watch. Well, there you go, President Biden yesterday, and now he's going to have another issue to deal with. The real issue at the border of folks trying to escape, trying to come here for a better life, escape harsh conditions in their home countries. Of course, there's a massive contingency of Americans and folks around the world that don't like new people coming in, at least not new people from certain countries. For that, we can be sure. And on some of those border states, at least, well, now they're trying a new tactic, and I'm really interested to see what is going to happen here. But yesterday, the Texas governor announcing that they're going to put the migrants, these folks who are basically refugees in many cases, people looking for a better life, they're going to throw them on a bus and send them to Washington, D.C. Yeah, that's apparently the idea. Here is the Texas governor, Abbott. They couldn't think of anything more extreme and more ridiculous. Here we go.
To help local officials whose communities are being overwhelmed by hordes of illegal immigrants who are being dropped off by the Biden administration, Texas is providing charter buses to send these illegal immigrants who have been dropped off by the Biden administration to Washington, D.C. We are sending them to the United States Capitol, where the Biden administration will be able to more immediately address the needs of the people that they are allowing to come across our border.
All right. Well, I read a couple of articles about it. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated immigration than he is saying it. They always simplify it so much. It's always important to remind people that in 2013, the Senate actually had a bill that they passed, comprehensive immigration reform, with more billions of dollars in security on the border than Republicans have ever gotten or could even dream of or even ask for anymore. It was actually in there along with so much more, including the pathway to citizenship and the Dreamers and so much more. Go look it up. It was there. It then went to the House of Representatives, and the Speaker of the House at the time, John Boehner, wouldn't even allow it to come up for a vote because he knew it would pass and that they wouldn't have this wedge issue, which now Governor Abbott is using and Governor DeSantis, as you'll soon hear, will be using as well as a stunt to put people apparently voluntarily on these buses and send them to Washington, D.C. So now they're going to increase already dismal border wait times, costing industries that are still reeling from COVID billions more dollars. And to add insult to injury, one person writes on Twitter, you're going to send send undocumented immigrants on taxpayer-funded vacations to Washington, D.C. Really conservative. The Dallas News has a quote from the co-director of the Immigration Clinic at the University of Texas at Austin School of Law. So she's an expert. She said this busing proposal disrespects people coming to the U.S. in search of protection. It treats them as inanimate objects to be moved around and used for political points. There are also serious legal questions, she said. Well, Governor Abbott called the initiative voluntary. If any migrants are forced to or coerced to travel, it could be a violation of their rights and trigger lawsuits, according to the experts, the legal experts on this. Of course, Beto O'Rourke, who's running against Abbott as a Democrat, is quoted as saying that if Abbott focused on solutions instead of stunts, then Texas could have had made some real progress on this issue over the last 7 years. He wrote that in a statement. Not to be outdone, as promised, here is Ron DeSantis trying to copy Governor Abbott and be as extreme as he possibly can.
If businesses or contractors are dumping people who are illegal into Florida from southern Texas, we're going to go after their ability to do business in Florida. If Biden is dumping people, which he has dumped people, they fly him in at 2 a.m. They haven't done it lately, but they did it many months ago. We now have money where we can reroute them to sanctuary states like Delaware, and we're going to do that to make sure that we're keeping them safe here.
Guessing a lot of the people clapping in that audience identify as thoughtful Christians. Okay, well, moving on to the White House press briefing yesterday, where Press Secretary Jen Psaki in her last couple weeks apparently headed to MSNBC, which is super weird and problematic, but still doing a great job answering questions from reporters. Let's start with a question about whether the U.S. military aid to Ukraine is for offensive or defensive purposes. I keep hearing this question, and it's weird that they can't come up with anything better, but here we go.
This administration has sent everything from medical supplies to laser-guided rockets to the Ukrainians right now. While this administration is making them more lethal, is the thought that we are bolstering their defensive capabilities, or is the administration confident that we are bolstering their offensive capability to, in fact, expel Russia from their borders?
Well, their country is being invaded, so it's all defensive. They're defending their sovereign country and the territorial integrity of Ukraine using these weapon systems that the Department of Defense has long categorized as defensive systems. You wouldn't go invade another country with a lot of these systems, the vast majority of these systems. That's not how you would go about it. And obviously that is not what they're doing. They're trying to protect their own people, their own cities, their own innocent civilians who are being invaded by a foreign power.
All right, and the controversy du jour that is now coming from and concerning from right-wing media that is related to emails that are found on Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden's laptop that reportedly show that apparently President Joe Biden wrote a college recommendation letter in 2017. So, of course, he wasn't the president at that time. He wrote a recommendation letter for the son of a Chinese executive who was a business partner with Hunter's. It's alleged. Fox News reports that it obtained emails between Hunter Biden and his associates at this investment firm, and they were reportedly in business with a Chinese firm. The White House acknowledged to the New York Post last year that Hunter Biden was an investor in the company, telling the outlet he was in the process of working to unwind his investment, and that he, of course, divested. And now it's really being conflated, and we have no idea if the letter was written or whether or not the kid got into the school. And I'm not even sure what the conflict of interest there was for the private citizen Joe Biden to write such a letter. But that didn't stop Steve Doocy from asking these questions. You're going to hear a lot more about it. That's why I spent about a minute and a half giving you some background, and here it is.
Was it common for President Biden to do favors for Hunter Biden's international business partners, like writing college recommendations for their kids?
I've seen the report. I have no confirmation or comment on a report about whether or not the president, when he was a private citizen, wrote a college recommendation letter for an individual.
A college recommendation letter, though, from, at the time, a former vice president would be a big deal. So do we know what the president might have gotten in return for doing a favor like that?
Again, I have no a confirmation of any recommendation letter the president wrote when he was a private citizen, by the way, not serving in public office. That's even the report.
But he's the president now, and you're his spokesperson.
Correct. And he was not the president at the time of this report.
So there's evidence that the president at one point was office mates with Hunter and his brother Jim here in D.C.
It's not accurate.
That is not accurate. So when Hunter Biden is emailing a landlord, please have keys made available for new office mates, Joe Biden, Jill Biden, Jim Biden, that you're disputing.
They were not office mates, no.
They were not office mates. Okay.
It's just hard to believe that we live in a world where that is the kind of question that is being asked to the President of the United States spokesperson, given everything that is at stake. The idea that anybody would write a letter or do a favor or trade on their family name, which, by the way, I've argued this before. Who doesn't do that? Who doesn't take a job from their dad? Like when you're growing up, when you're a teenager and you got a gig at anywhere from painting houses to a local restaurant. Like if your dad knew the guy who ran the restaurant, or you're painting your dad's friend's house. I mean, those are the types of things that you got. So at every level of life, the bigger deal and more influential your dad, your mom is, I mean, you're trading on their name. I've always been confused by how anybody could really separate themselves from that outside of Nicolas Cage, who refused to actually go by his real name, Scorsese. Don't I have that right? Come on, nerds, help me out. All right, one more question here from the White House briefing. This one is about the president's full-throated endorsement of the Amazon union.
And can I ask, President Biden today told union members, Amazon, here we come. Was he endorsing the efforts of workers to unionize Amazon facilities?
What he was not doing is sending a message that he or the U.S. government would be directly involved in any of these efforts or take any direct action. What he was conveying is his longtime support for collective bargaining, for the rights of workers to organize, and their decision to do exactly that in this case, something that he has long supported broadly over the course of his career.
All right, I like that answer from Jen Psaki. And now let's go to one more quick question. I think this one speaks for itself, but I liked it, thought it was important. Here you go.
China today urged the UN Security Council to verify and not to resort to unfounded conclusions on Bucha. And meanwhile, Chinese media is also repeating Russia's narrative that what's happened in Bucha is fake news. Can we get a White House reaction on that?
I would just say if you're repeating the propaganda of the Russian government and President Putin, you're on the wrong side of history.
Well, I like that. That was a direct and succinct answer. And there you go. That is the White House briefing, all I've got for you yesterday. Now, let's go over to the House of Representatives, where Congressman Jamie Raskin was just absolutely on fire at the 1-6 committee. And I think this one is a reference to Kevin McCarthy and Republicans saying that the 1-6 committee is not bipartisan, that it's a bunch of Democrats and leftists, of course, Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney are on that committee. And Jamie Raskin reminds Kevin McCarthy and the critics, they tried to create a bipartisan commission. Republicans wouldn't let them.
We were going to have a 9/11 style independent commission. And then you know what happened? You know who vetoed it? The fourth branch of government, Donald Trump, who some of their members slavishly report to like sycophants. And Donald Trump said he didn't want any investigation into the attack on this body, the Congress of the United States. He didn't want any investigation at all. And you know what the minority leader did? He walked it back. They pulled the plug on the independent commission. And that's why we ended up with the January 6th Select Committee in the House of Representatives, which the Speaker has made sure is bipartisan and has operated, in my experience, Mr. Speaker, as the most bipartisan committee I've ever been on. Why? Because we don't spend an hour at the beginning of each meeting with a bunch of empty partisan gimmicks and stunts, the kind we just saw wasting the taxpayers' money and time.
I found this other clip from that as well. Raskin is always on fire. He's always great, and I always love to find it and play it and share it with you in case you haven't heard it. Here he is.
The gentleman and his colleagues voted to thwart a totally bipartisan, independent outside commission made up of 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans with equal subpoena power, simply because Donald Trump exercised his veto within the Republican Party. The same Donald Trump who calls the madman mass murderer Vladimir Putin a genius. But we know that we've got some people echoing all of Trump's complicity with Vladimir Putin from the Georgia delegation back there.
Now, of course, he was referring to Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was screaming at him. And so he responded to her, and it is worth it.
The general lady, I think, said something about the Russian hoax or Russian collusion. I accept the heckling, Mr. Speaker, that's all right. Because if she wants to continue to stand with Vladimir Putin and his brutal, bloody invasion against the people of Ukraine, she is free to do so. And we understand there is a strong Trump-Putin axis in the general lady's party. She wants to continue to stand with Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. That is her prerogative. But please do it on your own time, forthwith. Mr. Speaker.
Oh, I love that forthwith. That was just a great heckle ender. I loved it. Jamie Raskin. And for her part, by the way, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she spent her day apparently threatening to sue Jimmy Kimmel. So she's doing fine. Everything's fine and normal. The fact that the QAnon is taking over the Republican Party is totally fine. Nothing to see or worry about with that. And let's stay in Washington at the House of Representatives, where they voted to hold former Donald Trump aides Peter Navarro and Dan Scavino in contempt of Congress on Wednesday for refusing to comply with the subpoenas issued by the House Select Committee investigating the Capitol insurrection. Before the vote, members made floor speeches on the contempt resolution. Here is Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who serves, of course, on the committee, urging colleagues to vote yes, while also taking a shot at Trump's former attorney, Rudy Giuliani. And I am here for it.
The election claims made by Donald Trump were so frivolous and so unfounded that the president's lead lawyer did not just lose these cases. He lost his license to practice law. The New York Supreme Court found, quote, there is uncontroverted evidence that Mr. Giuliani communicated demonstrably false and misleading statements to courts, lawmakers, and the public at large in his capacity as lawyer for former President Donald J. Trump and the Trump campaign in connection with Trump's failed effort at re-election in 2020. Mr. Speaker, those in this chamber who continue to embrace the former president and his dangerous and destructive lies ought to take a good, hard look at themselves. At a moment of real danger to our republic, when the need for fidelity to our Constitution is paramount, they have abandoned their oaths in order to perform for Donald Trump. That will be their legacy. Madam Chair, this is not a close call. Mr. Navarro and Mr. Scavino have chosen not to comply with a congressional subpoena. They are in contempt. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this resolution, and I reserve the balance of my time.
All right, there you go from the House yesterday. Let's head over to Fox News, of all places, where John Roberts had Tom Cotton, Senator Tom Cotton, on. He, of course, was subject of yesterday's, well, at least my outrage yesterday, and I shared that with you on the podcast yesterday. But here is some follow-up. And I only play this for you because it's worth hearing the response to it from the DNC chair, Jamie Harrison, on Morning Joe. But here he is, Tom Cotton, doubling down on his horrible, horrible comments about Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, who would have, he said, supported the Nazis at Nuremberg.
You don't think it was a bridge too far to make the link with Nuremberg and Nazis?
No, John, again, in three separate cases, she was representing not American citizens charged with a crime entitled to due process under our Constitution, foreign terrorists who had committed acts of violence against Americans. Again, these are not American citizens entitled to due process in a court of law. They were foreign terrorists in three cases that she voluntarily advocated for, in which she accused American soldiers of being war criminals. I don't think she should be on the Supreme Court.
Well, Jamie Harrison, who is the Democratic National Committee chairman, was on MSNBC with Joe and Mika, and this is what he had to say in response to Tom Cotton's comments, who then you just heard double down on them, given the opportunity to walk them back. But he's not going to because, well, I'll let Jamie Harrison call him names.
Jamie Harrison, your thoughts on Tom Cotton?
You know, in a Senate where there's Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham, Tom Cotton is the lowest of the low. A few years ago when Barack Obama was president of the United States, there was a person that he had appointed to be ambassador to Bahamas, a friend of his, Cassandra Butts. Cassandra worked on Capitol Hill. We all knew her. She was brilliant. Cassandra had leukemia. She was up for confirmation, and Tom Cotton blocked her confirmation. 835 days she waited to be confirmed ambassador of Bahamas. And when asked why he was holding up her confirmation, he said because he wanted to hurt Barack Obama. It shows you who this little maggot-infested man is. He does not deserve to have that pen. He doesn't deserve to be in the United States Senate representing the good people of Arkansas. He doesn't deserve and doesn't know, and Joe hit the nail on the head. He put his hand on the Bible, took an oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, and he uses it as a play toy. Yeah. That is the Republican Party that we see today. It is a party built on fraud, fear, and fascism, and they don't deserve to be in power.
All right. Well, there you go. Maggot infested. That seems like a new low for name calling. Certainly, I haven't heard, I think, a Democrat quite use that kind of rhetoric in the mainstream. That's the DNC chairman, Jamie Harrison, who ran for Senate against Lindsey Graham in South Carolina and lost to Lindsey Graham, calling Senator Tom Cotton maggot infested. I'm not sure that's helpful. Well, it might feel satisfying to hear because Tom Cotton is such a reprehensible human being. Maggot infested? Where are you on maggot infested? Let's debate that one. All right. Well, that is all the sound I've got for you on today's Last 24, but I got a whole bunch more headlines coming your way. Let's see what Pete Coe has for a jingle for us today. This jingle is based on a story coming out of the Bay Area, California. The headline, Protecting Free Roaming Cats from Morgan Hill Mountain Lion.
Domestic cats are roaming wild, free to run and jump. Be careful of mountain lions on today's news dump.
Yeah, those domestic cats are free to run and jump, but they might get eaten by a mountain lion. Scary out there in California. Have you ever seen a mountain lion? Another reason to get a surveillance camera. My friend Rich Louv, the great celebrated nature writer, subscriber, and listener of this show, has caught a few mountain lions on his property with his surveillance cameras out there in Southern California. Very cool and very scary if you're a small cat. Okay, moving on. Well, a mini COVID wave is said to be hitting the D.C. elite. Merrick Garland tested positive. Adam Schiff tested positive. And COVID cases may be dropping across the U.S., but apparently in Washington, D.C., they're facing a mini surge of their own. I read that yesterday. Very sad news to hear that liberal media critic Eric Boehlert, who I had a great deal of respect for, was killed in an accident. He was 57 years old. And his family wrote, through his journalism, social media, books, and appearances on CNN and MSNBC, Eric was a fierce defender of democracy, social justice, and truth in media. He was fearless and brilliant in his investigation of hypocrisies and double standards in the media, and his contribution was priceless. News of his death provoked an outpouring of grief, including from myself. I knew and loved Eric. I didn't know him, I should say. I interviewed him, I think, once at SiriusXM, but I was a big fan and supporter of his work, especially in his new independent media press run. And there was just a real outpouring, including by people like Soledad O'Brien, who wrote, adored his kids, Jane and Ben, his dogs, biking, running, basketball, and good friends, a fierce and fearless defender of the truth. Eric was an amazing friend. He fought to rescue journalism and democracy, which need saving. Will Bunch at the Philadelphia Inquirer knew Boehlert for more than a decade, called him one of the great human beings in journalism, just a good-natured dad, sports lover, outdoorsman who happened to be a relentless pit bull in the public arena and calling out misinformation or shoddy work in the media, whether it was his bête noire, am I saying that right? Fox News, or often at mainstream outlets like the New York Times. And then Hillary Clinton tweeted, I'm devastated for his family and friends and will miss his critical work to counteract misinformation and media bias. What a loss. So that's just a sampling of the outpouring of grief from the very, very early death of, I think, a guy who did amazing work. Well said by everybody who I just read. All right, moving on. U.S. electric vehicle tax credits are ending for new Toyota buyers. Toyota customers soon won't be able to get the U.S. federal tax credits for buying electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles because they'll reach their 200,000 vehicle cap on the credits, and each manufacturer can only sell just so many that are the buyer is entitled to the credit. And after that, the credits are phased out over the next year, reaching zero, as Tesla and General Motors already have. And that's problematic for automakers shifting away from oil or gas-powered vehicles to batteries in an effort to reduce emissions. A lot more to talk about with that. Moving on, though, the UN will vote today on suspending Russia from the Human Rights Council, and it's their premier human rights body, of course, and they will vote on that and might have already had the vote by the time you're hearing this. What else have I got? How about this one? Majority black Detroit has become the largest city to challenge its figures from the 2020 census following a national headcount in which the U.S. Census Bureau acknowledges African Americans were undercounted. Again, the headline, Detroit, largest city to challenge 2020 census numbers. That's an interesting issue I'd like to look more into, and I'm going to have to think about who might be best to talk to about that. When you're undercounted, it matters so much. And I saw this headline and have to mention it. Apparently 5,000 people have died in the southeast Ukrainian city of Mariupol since Russia invaded the country. The city's mayor said in a roundtable discussion that was broadcast live on Facebook on Wednesday. The death toll includes some 210 children. Absolutely horrific. As a result, the U.S. will impose a new round of economic sanctions on Russia. I think I mentioned that at the top. The White House announced Wednesday, including on the adult children of Vladimir Putin, other influential Russians, in response to new accusations that he committed war crimes in Ukraine. President Biden on Wednesday announced an extension of the payment pause on federal student loans through August 31st. The moratorium on student loan payments was previously set to expire on May 1st. And out of Minnesota, more problems with the police there. No charges will be filed in the death of Amir Locke, a black 22-year-old man shot by a SWAT team officer during a no-knock warrant raid in Minneapolis in February. Officials announced this yesterday. Hennepin County Attorney Michael Freeman said Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison said in a statement they are declining to file criminal charges in his death, and that's caused a great controversy there. And finally, I like this story. Libraries apparently are more popular than ever, even as people borrow fewer books. New study finding that while everybody thinks nobody reads favorite books anymore, your local public library may be the hottest place in town. Researchers from a data and analytics group looked at nearly 17,500 libraries over the last 3 decades and found that these institutions aren't dying in the digital age. They may actually be thriving. Well, I'm going to have to look into that, but apparently over 174 million people in the country are registered at a local library. That's nearly 54% of the population. Lots to talk about with that, I'm sure, but that's all the time I'm giving. Today's headlines on the news dump. There you have it. Okay, there you go. That's all the news I've got for you, and now it's time to get to my one and only guest today, but what a guest he is. But before, I just want to mention this is more great music, transition music, mixed up by Patrick Wilson, who goes by Audible, O-U-G-H-T-A-B-L-E, on SoundCloud. But back to my guest, who is a combat veteran of the Iraq War who served 4 years in the Army. And I met him through the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America organization, who I worked with quite a bit when I was back at SiriusXM doing my stand-up with the veterans segment that we did every week for, I think, over a year. Matt was certainly one of the many guys that I profiled. I interviewed him for his first book, his Iraq memoir, Kaboom, which won awards. Amazing book from 2010. He's also the author of Youngblood, most recently Empire City, and he has the respect of all of his writing peers and his veteran peers of his generation. Everybody knows who Matt is. He's a great guy. He's a family man. He's married to a woman who's a principal, as a matter of fact, at a school. I'm not sure how much of that he actually shares publicly. So he went over to Ukraine and trained Ukrainians to fight. He was asked to do it by a couple of other guys, combat vets that he knew. and he reported on it for Esquire magazine. I got to say, give shout out to Paul Rykoff, my friend Paul Rykoff, who's the host of Independent Americans, who introduced me to Matt. He just had Matt on his show. I didn't even know he had done this, and so I was really interested in hearing about it. And so I called up my old friend Matt Gallagher, who you can follow, by the way, on Twitter, at Matt Gallagher 0, at Matt Gallagher 0. His website is mattgallagherwriter.com. I think you're really going to like this conversation I had with Matt. It's interesting, it's exciting, it's crazy, and it's super important in my opinion. Please let Matt know you heard him here on the program. That always means a lot, and here we go. Okay, there he is, my old friend Matt Gallagher, who is one of my favorite writers, and I always love to see his reactions to anything on social media, and he's just back from Ukraine, where he has been radicalized, it looks like.
Just a little bit, for the greater good of democracy.
For the greater good of democracy, which is probably the title of a conversation you and I could have. Maybe, well, I'm sure it'll be weaved in through this, because certainly that's an element of it. But why did you go? Why did you go to Ukraine? How did that come about? You hooked up with these friends of yours, both combat veterans themselves. But how did this unfold? And was it fast?
It was very fast. And why? To be honest with you, Pete, I'm still trying to unpack it myself. Because I do kind of have a bit of a hippie streak. I've never really felt the pull to go to conflict zones, since my return in Iraq in 2009. I have friends that work in journalism or whatever that talk about kind of the tug of it. And I've never felt that once. But Saturday in late February, my friend Adrian, who's married to a Ukrainian woman and has himself covered the war there in Donbass for a few years now, reached out and said that through their connections, they knew there was a need from the Lviv City Council to bring in combat veterans to train a civilian defense force that they were mobilizing and standing up, kind of in preparation. The war, at that point, the Kyiv offensive had just started. So, it was kind of an open question of how quickly Russia was going to roll in.
Right.
And is this something I'd be interested in joining and participating in? And I had about 48 hours to decide. He gave me the time of link up at JFK Airport and
48 hours. Hold on, 48 hours to decide if you want to join them. You've got 2 young sons at home and a wife who has an equal, if not more powerful voice than your own on your choices, who has compromised with you and your life. I mean, can we just go deep into the marriage conversation? No, I mean, I wanted to lay that out. Just so 48 hours. I mean, how did you decide that? How did you decide to go?
I changed my mind a few times, and I just kind of kept looking at my boys, and I don't know. I don't think I would have been able to father properly if it was a clear good thing that Adrian and our other friend Benjamin Bush were intending to do. Teaching civilians on self-defense. I trust these people. I know they're on the up and up. So if they say something's righteous, I believe them. We can get into this later, but there's all kinds of murkiness that's going to surround any war, and that's certainly rolling into Ukraine right now. So I didn't have to worry about that, but these were people who just needed some basic skills and needed some basic training. And as a generalist on these matters, Ben was taking, myself, Ben just needed kind of support trainers. He was taking the lead, and I knew I could do it, and it felt like the right thing to do. And I didn't think I could live with myself or my family if I didn't do it. So my wife was very resistant to it at first, but once she realized how much this meant, she was very supportive. She was a champion. And my mother-in-law flew in on kind of a couple days notice and helped take care of the family. And I will be forever in my wife and my mother-in-law's debt for a few more decades until I die, I guess.
Mother-in-law building some serious capital right there with that move. That's a lady playing the long game.
Shout out to Nora, for sure.
Shout out to Nora for being smart and playing the long game. I can't. Let's reconnect when she cashes those chips in when your sons are teenagers.
Good plan.
She wants to take them on a very long trip. So what did you do? You get on a plane? I mean, these logistics, you're working with experienced guys, one of which his wife is Ukrainian, but she's made a name for herself as a journalist here in the States. And so obviously she can be a translator, but you probably needed more than just one. I mean, how logistically did you get it together? How did you get there? You land in, I guess, Poland?
We did. We landed in Krakow.
Oklahoma. For you, Oklahoma to Krakow.
Oh, yeah, Oklahoma. Let's see. So Tulsa, Chicago, JFK, JFK to Krakow, then a midnight drive across the border to Lviv. I think it was about 36 hours. I was not in tip-top condition by the time we zonked out in Lviv that first night. And, we just kind of hit the ground running. We had a meeting with the city council and some other power brokers that very first day. It was essentially an interview, them making sure that we said we were who we said we were, that they're getting deluged with all kinds of well-intentioned Westerners showing up, asking how they can help, and good on them for establishing parameters to determine who can and who's just better off milling about kind of in the old town, in the old tourist area.
Yeah, well, you're being kind. I mean, your writing is beautiful as always and very descriptive as always, but you could do a stand-up bit, if you did stand-up, about the different types of characters. And let's say they're all well-intended, and I'm probably being generous, but there's the guy who just showed up and he's loud and looking for trouble. He wants to help, but then there's another person who is a social justice warrior, and they're there. I'm not sure exactly what to do. I mean, you talk about these people in your GQ article, and I think that's interesting and important. And then there's you guys, and we've already talked a little bit about who you are and why you went there. But tell us a little bit about who else you ran into at the train station or downtown.
Yeah, for sure. So there was the type goons, we took to calling them, just kind of weirdos, military adjacent folks. The stories of Proud Boys showing up over there would certainly qualify in this group.
Could you tell if their nationality? Were they American? Were they European, British?
A lot of Brits, a lot of Americans, just based on their accent and just kind of just the way they conducted themselves.
Right. Well, yeah, you can.
Honestly, most of them didn't even make it across the border. Most of those guys we saw in Krakow and are probably still there talking about how many Ukrainians they're going to save or how many Russians they're going to kill.
Right. Those are the ones you generally in your line of work are a little bit more wary of. Those who are talking a lot about the things they're going to do or are doing.
Yeah, and especially something like this where any kind of vetting is going to be unofficial.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
I don't have access to these guys' DD-214s, like their official military paperwork. I could probably guess they're not exactly who they say they are, just based on how they're presenting themselves. But yeah, there's I've been back about 10 days now, and I'm sure there's even more goons in Poland and in Western Ukraine and Romania, and we'll continue to just kind of mill about looking for something like purpose. Then you had a lot of kind of contractor types, real quiet middle-aged businessmen wearing frumpy khakis and really nice shoes and watches. Those guys gave themselves away with their watches.
Now,
and
what
shoes.
What are they doing? What are their different types of ambitions, roles, and are they needed?
It's a tricky question.
I mean, there's a lot of opportunity here for people.
There's money to be made. There's money to be made, and some of them are needed, right? Like war is a business, perhaps first and foremost. And certainly, all the equipment conversations we're seeing coming from the Ukrainian side, they need this stuff. Like, so a javelin salesman, yeah, I think he's going to be a popular guy. But you're going to get all kinds of other types of. I
mean, are they really? Is it like that overt? Is there a guy like, hey, how you doing? My name is Jim. I'm from Detroit. I sell javelins.
I didn't see a javelin salesman. We did see through some of our trainees, supposed veterans of American Special Military Operations, offering for the low price of $2,000 a day per man, either exfiltration services because Ukrainian men aren't allowed out of the country. So these groups are saying that they can get, if the rich Ukrainian man wants to get out of the country, they can get him out.
Oh, so yeah, if you're rich, you can get out by these guys will protect you. 2,000. Wow, that's an opportunity. Okay, that's a job there. Interesting.
Yeah. War never changes. The rich always find their way out.
Well,
right?
When you said that war is primarily a business, obviously, I think people can understand that, but should be mentioned, and we can pivot here a little bit more to the human element, that the people of Ukraine didn't want this war. They are prepped, and you were there to train them, but you also got to know them. You got to know who they were and about their culture, their history, their desires, and why those who did stay and fight did just that. And so tell me a little bit about so you're there. Let me just finish up though. You guys are there to train people who had no experience. That's the group of people that you got connected to, however so. And so you were training people who were, I think one of them was a lawyer. Somebody might have worked in a restaurant. They'd never, most of them, fired a gun. They might not even be very athletic, and you're much less have any idea about strategy. You as a generalist, as a veteran, as well as your colleagues there are teaching people with almost zero experience how to fight in combat in, I guess, an urban setting. Is that right?
Exactly. Just giving them basic skills that if and when they're mobilized by their local territorial defense force, and if and when they choose to pick up a gun, because that choice is going to be theirs. Because again, these are not soldiers. They'll have some semblance of what to do. So we taught them basic room defense, basic close quarters marksmanship. We spent a lot of time doing urban terrain movement and urban combat awareness, teaching them how to move in fire teams and squads, giving them kind of different reconnaissance missions, and slowly building this up. All the starting with the basics on a foundational level. Just teaching them how to run across an open field properly, so they don't get sniped as a meat popsicle. Identifying leaders, that was something that the local leadership at that first meeting at the city council wanted us to focus on. Was, hey, give us a list of a few names, so when shit really pops off, we know who to reach out to get organized and mobilized. And you put people in these stressful conditions, it's very, very quickly the leaders will emerge and identify themselves. A great example being my man, Petraeus, who is probably about a 45, 50-year-old round geography teacher. Not a soldier, thick glasses. But you know what? He had presence. He had command presence. People listened to him. He took this shit so seriously, and he worked so hard at it. And he got better and better and better. That's leadership. I don't care that he doesn't look like Chris Kyle. He at the end of those 2 weeks, he was in charge of his squad because he'd earned it and because people listened to him. And that's the kind of thing. I mean, we're not turning these guys into special operators. We're turning them into task organizing and training them up to be resistance fighters if necessary, and they'll be ready. It sounds crazy. 2 weeks does not sound like a lot of time, but given the dedication and how serious they took this, with the war going on, every day gave us new motivation and new updates on why what we were doing was so relevant. They legit came a long, long way. Like they were moving like a military type squad in this compound of abandoned buildings, which is what a hollowed out, war torn city would look like.
So crazy what you experienced, what you did. Unlike anything, I'm sure. Well, not completely anything what you experienced in Iraq, but certainly like so much of the purpose. I mean, you're such a deep thinking guy. I'm sure the whole time you were there, you're constantly having an inner monologue going, what am I doing? Is this good? Am I doing a good job? Because you're such a curious and thoughtful and kind and passionate guy. You write about this in a diary-like fashion in Esquire magazine, and it's really great, and everybody should go read that. But you document more than the guy you just told me about. I was going to ask you to tell me more. Is it Nikolai or Nikolai?
Nikolai. Though I gave all the Ukrainians different names to conceal their identities.
Right. So we're calling him that. Well, tell me about this guy, what he was doing, and your relationship with him.
Yeah, he was our liaison. He was there at that initial meeting. He claimed throughout our time together that he was a civilian.
Right.
Didn't really behave like one, as far as I could tell. He enjoyed me prodding him about this. He would always kind of give me a mysterious smile and just kind of, look, nod. But, he was the guy that was overseeing all this and was very hands-on those first couple of days to make sure that we knew what we were doing, and then just kind of disappeared in the shadows. He had other stuff to take care of. He would come and go, meet up with us for dinner to discuss logistics. We said, hey, we want to do a map class tomorrow. Can you get us 50 city maps? Got us 50 city maps. Said, hey, we need 50 tourniquets for a medical class. Got us 50 tourniquets. He was a really fascinating, mysterious individual that was keeping this operation and I believe a few other operations similar to ours, but maybe serving different purposes running. And he was one person maybe when I sat back to kind of make sense of our time in Lviv. Good man, honorable man, no idea who he really is.
Right. Well, that's the thread here in this kind of conflict throughout human history, I guess, is an issue about trust, especially when folks kind of look the same and have similar backgrounds, maybe speak similar languages and so on. It's hard to know who is who. And I know you ran into that. So this guy vetting you vetting that guy or woman, obviously there were women there as well that you were working with. Like, tell me about the trust issues. Tell me about your experience with people, kind of the way that they vetted you. I mean, I guess they're mysterious when they meet an American, but you probably know whose side the American is on. That's not necessarily the case with other people that you meet there. Tell me about the trust issues that you experienced.
Yeah, at first it's really hard because they're strangers. They speak a different language. There was the image is seared to my brain that first meeting. It happened like dusk in an abandoned chemical factory. I turn around and I see 50 or 60 Ukrainians looking at the three of us for guidance. And it was a kind of a classic case of fake it till you make it, switching part of my brain on that I hadn't used in many years, because I've been out of the Army about a decade now, and conveying authority, conveying a sense of leadership and presence that these people needed, because that's why they were there, right? They're giving us their time and commitment. They deserve our best and our knowledge as much as we can give them. Over time, they become individuals, right? At first, it's the translators and the kind of kids fresh out of college. They have some experience working with NATO trainers, and this is how they're serving their country now, right? Is translating for Americans at these kind of different camps, de facto camps that are being stood up across the country. And there's a familiarity there. They already kind of speak, their English is fluent. They come from maybe a similar social background and social class that I do. So I'm able to kind of jive with them and start lobbing questions their way. And they're helping me make sense of this new world. And that way it was very similar to Iraq, right? That how much we relied on our interpreters there. And then from there, getting to know there was one civil affairs officer, Daniela was her name, 23, kind of fresh out of the Ukrainian version of West Point. And, she'd just been in the shit. She'd been a couple days before we got there, she'd been shelled by artillery out east. And she'd been kind of evac'd out west for a few weeks to make sense of life again. And this is her assignment, is to help out the Lviv City Council. And she gets tasked to us. And she's worked with Americans before. She knows what our questions are. She's helping us break down the particulars of Ukraine. She was the one that explained the nuances of the Euromaidan demonstrations from 2014 to me, which I was vaguely familiar with, but she was able to kind of get into the details of how this really was kind of a grassroots thing that started by youth and blue collar workers across the country. With a revolution that overthrew the Russia-friendly Ukrainian government is what you're referring to, in case. Yeah, I mean, I think about that all the time, by the way. I wonder how ever present that was with even the older generation, much less the youth who was out there in the streets, because that was just such an unbelievable thing. If you paid any attention to it, much less close attention to it, what those young people accomplished, how they accomplished it, what time of year, standing in the cold they accomplished it, and that's kind of like has to be the motivation to fight, because when you get out there and you launch this kind of youth revolution and you win. You beat the Russia-friendly guy, and you have an election, and you vote in Zelensky. Like, all of that, you live through Trump, and I want to ask you about that. That seems to be a good enough motivation for any human experience to stay and fight once you were part of that revolution. Can you say anything about how ever present that was? That's 100%. Right, Pete.
By the way, I'm guessing. I haven't read that. I just assume that's what it must be like if you were present for the revolution.
If you're 24 or 25, you're even 30, you're a young person in Ukraine. 8 years may not seem like much to us. 8 years is their everything. Right. 8 years is their entire formative experience of living in a relatively free-ish, relatively democracy-ish country, right? They fought for that. And now that's under existential threat again. Of course you're going to show up and do your part and push back and not let these jackals roll in and seize your capital. No, I mean, it's, I think an entire country is fighting back, but from what I observed, it's being led by a generation of young people who have sampled European style life and want to maintain it and believe this is their future. This is their country. To hell if that's going to be seized away from them. They won before. They're going to win again. And they believe it. They don't talk about after the war. They talk about after the victory. And they sincerely mean it. It is not a PR thing. It is like a deeply embedded world psyche thing.
Yeah, I think it's a tough thing for political analysts, especially those who are far from the place, to analyze, especially on cable TV. I mean, so many people got it wrong because I think they probably couldn't capture what you're talking about, the attitude and that accomplishment. So, and the way you said it as well, 8 years for them has been a lifetime. So you and your buddies are training these people. They're total civilians. Is it like, what's it for, and how does it work? Like they come in and you were there for 3 weeks and you go through a whole bunch of different types of things and strategies. You mentioned medical stuff, teaching how to wrap the tourniquet and all that. But then what happens? They go back to their homes, their lives, and then the bat light goes on and they all coalesce together and take what you taught them. And like what were you training for, and how does that play out, and has it, if you know?
Sure. I mean, so we were just kind of the beginning of this whole operation. We were kind of building it on the fly, task organizing them into teams and squads and units. A group of trainers replaced us, right? Specialists who were going to focus on a certain set of skills and training, and then they're going to do it for a few weeks and they'll pass it off to other people cycling in. And in between, we identified those leaders, so they're going to lead the classes themselves, and they're showing up, if not every day, every couple days, and doing it themselves. We took them to a rifle range for the very first time. That wasn't a one-shot deal. They're going to keep firing their weapons to get better. It's like anything else. These are perishable skills. Just because we taught them how to move as a squad through urban rubble, and they looked good doing it for CNN cameras. That wasn't the goal. They need to keep doing it, and we stress this to them, and I know they're still doing it. They're continuing to work with others. They're continuing to work with one another. They haven't been mobilized yet, but they fall under the territorial defense, the official Ukrainian territorial defense umbrella. And, if the war is starting to threaten Western Ukraine, they will be mobilized. They will be treated as soldiers. And this way they'll have the equipment. They'll have some knowledge and skills. So they're not showing up trying to learn all this stuff in 2 or 3 days before the Russian scouts get there. They already know what to do. And it was a number of things too. Like I taught some classes on information gathering, that if it ever gets to a full resistance movement where it's a Russian occupied city and territory, right? I'm well aware some of those folks were more comfortable than others picking up a gun. Some will absolutely collect some skulls if the war gets there.
Right.
Others were more comfortable supporting the resistance without picking up a gun. And that's okay. And that's something we wanted to stress to them too, because again, these are civilians, and there's a multitude of different ways to serve one's country in such a situation.
So I have so many more questions for you about this experience. It's unbelievable, and you've documented it, and everybody should read it. As always, reading your work really makes you feel like you were there. And one thing, by the way, that you and the guys who you were there with, who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and you were in Iraq, hadn't experienced is cold weather. You were there for 3 weeks, the coldest, I think probably the coldest time of the year in that part of the world. Did you anticipate that? Were you cold? Did you have to thaw out at some point? Was there heat?
Not at the warehouse. No, we were bundled up. It was snowing. I think I saw sunlight twice during our entire time there, like just brief glimmers. It was a very Ukraine experience.
Yeah.
I've been told to go back in June, but you're moving and you're focused. And again, like I can't stress how seriously these people took it, and just how much pressure then is on us to meet the moment, to meet the occasion, right? That it's not just to feel good and feel good about trying something. It's about to give them quality training. And so much of that I want to stress is owed to my fellow trainers, Adrian Bonenberger, who was a company commander in Afghanistan, and just really disciplined, good leader that kind of brought all this together. His wife, Irina, is the Ukrainian journalist who was doing God's work with aid relief while we were there. And then our third trainer, Benjamin Bush, was really kind of the lead trainer in terms of the hands-on training. 16 years as a reconnaissance Marine, big wild hair. The guy's in a band. He's a writer. He's an actor. just total badass, and somehow got away with wear like his House of Stark Game of Thrones T-shirt, even in like the 15-degree Ukrainian weather. And part of that is because Ben's a bit of a character. There's also leadership. Like I looked at it and it was like he instantly kind of got this respect and attention from the Ukrainians. They're like, who is this wild man? Like, yeah, he's running around in 15-degree Ukrainian weather like it's not even phasing him. I better pay attention. And he knows his business. He knows his shit. Like every night I would sit down with him and be like, hey, what do you want to teach tomorrow? And it was a refresher for me. I was only in the Army for 4 years. He was our specialist, and he was such an incredible leader that really elevated this to quality training.
Did you ever think or even assume that there were people in your group, or certainly always around, that were spies?
So yeah, like day 2 or 3, and this is in the story, I kind of freaked. My Irish temper came out at lunch because the security posture at the compound was a bit lax. I thought people were filming us. I just didn't want to become a cautionary tale, right? And we weren't. Lviv
not after all this time. Not after this career.
Lviv wasn't the front by any means, but the war was ever present.
Yeah.
Right. Cruise missiles hit when we were there. Saboteurs were a constant concern. There's just kind of this crackling, distrustful energy all about the city. And so I just kind of demanded professional security, right? Clearing weapons before you enter the compound, putting all cell phones in a bin, saying, listen, if you don't want to be here under these conditions, I don't care. I'm here to train the people who are serious and are willing to meet these conditions. And to my man Nikolai's credit, he kind of looked at me and nodded his head and said, no problem. And the next day, everything was locked down. Now, am I aware, looking back on it, that it's because they already had their own security postures, whether official government ones or local business, we'll say? Yeah, I think there was some elements of that. Looking back on, there was some blending of maybe oversight from the special police force, probably was checking in on us, and some of our power brokers had a lot of different business interests around the city. It would not have served them well to have dead Americans on their docket. So I'm sure we were always safe, but it was important to me that we look the part and that we feel that way. And then after that, that was it. The remaining 15 days of training or whatever we had, it was really, really well done. And we were able to focus on getting these people up to speed as much as possible.
What did you learn about what they thought about Russia and the Russian invasion, Russian soldiers, and what did they think about the U.S.?
Very supportive of the U.S. It's kind of a jarring thing, I think, as an American to go to Eastern Europe and encounter genuine pro-Americanism, since so much of the world you're not going to encounter that when you travel. Would not tolerate any kind of throat clearing. They didn't like it when we talked about our experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan critically. They didn't want to hear that, and it's because they want to hear what worked, right, for us. And it's more complicated than this on an individual basis, but in a time of war, particularly when the Ukrainian people are mobilized as one, the U.S. is still a beacon of freedom and democracy. And I know how that sounds to certain ears here in the States, but it's also fucking true, right? And that was invigorating, to be honest with you, Pete. Like to see what my country can still represent despite so many of our blunders and mistakes and outright failures these last 20 years. As something else that you just kind of got used to, just to be honest, like as an American, we're so used to qualifying things and, well, Putin's war. And a lot of the Ukrainians would push back on that and say, no, this is Russia's war. Like the Russian people are complicit in this, right? I mean, they're sending their sons, right? We know some Russians are for this. Okay, not all Russians, but for them, it's an existential threat, right? It's not as simple as just getting rid of one man or talking one madman off the ledge. For them, it's much deeper than that. It's much more complicated. And I don't know, as a dumbass American, like who am I to say they're wrong? They've lived and breathed this stuff their entire lives. I'm coming in for a few weeks to teach you how to cross a road and not get yourself sniped. That was really interesting to me. And I think it's something that makes some Westerners uncomfortable because it is kind of painting in broader strokes, but it was the truth of the conversations I had with these people.
The tone, the mood, the general feeling was of fear, anger. I mean, is there any way to even say I can't imagine the emotional spectrum one goes through when you're defending your home and maybe your family is left and all of that. I would think there'd be a lot of anger.
Yeah, I mean, just very seriousness, especially within the compound, and no, out and about the city. I mean, nobody smiles. Once we got to know these people on a personal level, you would laugh, you would joke, and then get back to business. Once the camaraderie had built up, in a strange way, they let down their guard with me when they learned I kind of was like a literature professor, right? Like I was a normal person, that I wasn't just kind of this soldier of fortune traveling from conflict to conflict zone. I think that kind of humanized me, and that's when they started to let down their guards with me and started showing me pictures of their kids, telling me what they really did in real life.
Is it true, Matt, that you were lugging around huge bags of your own work, handing out your books to only to the young Ukrainians?
Thrusting copies of unread novels upon them. Please,
unread novels, manuscripts.
No, probably for the Ukrainian people's benefit, I was not able to fit any into my pack. So,
it's what else did you learn about them, their culture, anything? Did you eat anything? Did anybody, did you meet any Ukrainian grandmothers that made you some kind of special soup, or any ethnic experiences you can share?
Oh, ate like a king. The food over there is delicious. They have a kind of they're not called pierogies. The Ukrainian name is escaping me at the moment. They have their own kind of style of pierogi that's just frankly better than the Polish version.
Oh wow!
And the vodka, they know what they're doing. Some of the smoothest. I'm not a vodka guy, but the smoothest vodka I've ever had in my life.
Oh yeah, and it was flowing gratuitously. I mean, they weren't rationing in it.
There was officially there was an alcohol ban when we were there.
Yeah,
which makes sense. So, they don't want if the country's going to get invaded or cruise missile, they don't want a bunch of drunk people are going to drink to deal with this level of stress. But people are people, and booze could be found pretty. A few of our trainees owned restaurants and stuff, and like for them, their way of paying us back was feeding us and plying us with booze. And we were getting up early in the morning and get to work, but after a long day on your feet running around, a couple drinks help too.
I wanted to ask you, because you came back before all these photos were made public of the dead bodies in the streets and what everybody is at this point probably heard about or seen. And I always do read your Twitter feed. You retweet a lot of people. You give your thoughts on things. But what do you make of those tactics? And having been there now, and it must have hit you. It's hard for most people to kind of understand. You try to humanize those people and think. I mean, I saw one woman had her hand, dead body with her hands were manicured, and it was just like, oh, that's just like my kids. And you try to humanize them as much as you can, but you don't know these people. You were there, you knew these people, and then you see these horrible images coming out. First, did you know that kind of thing was happening? And second, how are you reacting to seeing these war crimes and these bodies in the streets like this?
I'd say the Ukrainians knew, because they were asking questions about our experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan, and not to say there's a right way to do it, but the way we occupied our cities and towns is vastly different than what we're seeing, what the Russians are attempting to do. Kharkiv being a great example, Mariupol, right? Just artillery shells and missile strikes, just pounding this stuff in the rubble. Just very different. And our trainees told us that like, we want to prepare for how the Russians fight, and that we did research accordingly, right? To tailor our training to their needs, right? Because not relying solely on our own experience, because that would be foolish,
right?
And so, as for kind of this past week, it's been hard for me to look at this stuff and not think of my trainees, because they are the same people. They do live in the same kind of suburbs. They do the same kind of, our trainees mostly came from the middle class. Some of them were welders or bus drivers. Others were IT workers or lawyers. We had a doctor, law students, kind of ran the gamut. They're normal people, right? And I think that's something that maybe gets lost sometimes in kind of the gore of this is they were just trying to live their lives, right? And they wrong place, wrong time. It's simply a matter of geography that the people I worked with are still alive, and those people in the suburbs around Kyiv have been massacred. That's it. That's the only difference. And I don't know. It's awful, but it's also so vital that we don't look away,
right?
Because otherwise we lose sight of the truth.
Last question for you is, how are you doing since you came back? What did your wife say? How do you feel about the decision that you went? You wrote about, a few entries in your piece at Esquire. You wrote things that had happened while you were gone with your son. Your sons are little, so there's a lot of firsts. But then you also talked about how you saw kids your son's age in Ukraine. So now that you're back and you're probably starting to just digest it, like, how do you feel about that you went? How does your wife feel that you went? And how do you look at your sons now that you're back?
It was fulfilling work. I'm proud of the work we did. I'm proud of the work we accomplished. I'm proud of the people I met and the work they put in. I'm left, kind of left with this lingering sense that it wasn't enough, that there was more to be done. But I also have responsibilities back here. It's very serious responsibilities. We didn't change the trajectory of the war or anything. We helped in some small way, and that's not nothing. I pray more than anything that we never have to find out how effective our training was, that these people can just go back to their normal lives, and this will just be a thing they briefly remember at the end of their very long lives. We haven't talked. I brought back some souvenirs for my kids. They were excited by the Cossack, little kind of Cossack figurines, right? Guys with swords. They think that's cool. They're young. They're 4 and 1. So, the serious conversations about this will happen in a few years. But, if nothing else, I don't want them to be soldiers unless they want to be. It's not something I plan on encouraging, but I do want them to be people that want to help others and go and help others when they're able to. So, plenty of terrible fatherhood examples await them, I'm sure, but hopefully this will be a good one for them. And as for my wife, total champion, who has put me to work on many domestic tasks since I returned, and has informed me that I'm not even close to making it up for her. So I'm still deep in her debt.
I met your wife for we all were at this dinner with Paul Rieckhoff hosted years back, and I met and I think hung out with your wife and you, probably even more with your wife. And it was one of those things where she impressed me. I was like, when you meet somebody's partner and you're like, I get why they married this person. Like, in just talking to her for a couple hours and following your career and your move and everything, I was like, yeah, smart guy. And she's a smart woman. You guys are awesome. I appreciate you talking to me. Is it true now that since you got back, you're driving around in a Lamborghini? Is that what this was?
That's false, unfortunately.
Oh, it is false.
As are the I've gotten occasional Twitter accusations that I'm actually a CIA agent, and I think since you know me, Pete, you know how terrible of a spook I would be. I can't keep my mouth shut about anything. So I think that is also false.
A part of me thinks you're smart enough to recognize where they might be or their ilk, but maybe you're smart enough also to realize that wasn't your lane and never will be.
No, with respect, most of the people I knew who became spooks were fucking nerds when I knew them. So not my style.
Yeah. What is that? Marijuana? Keep it away from me. Thank you very, very much, Matt. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Pete. Always good talking with you.
All right, there goes Matt Gallagher. Check out that article, his whole journal that he published basically at Esquire. It is very fascinating, and he's such a great writer. I think I'm smart enough to recognize original, impressive writing, and he is so good. MattGallagherWriter.com. I highly recommend getting all of his books. Follow him on Twitter at MattGallagher0. Go let him know that you heard him here. Please go do that now. Ask that you do that of all of our guests. That's what makes them realize that there are a lot of people listening out there and care what they have to say. And I really would always appreciate it when you let them know. Okay, that's it. That's all I've got time for you on today's show. Tomorrow I'm scheduled to talk to CNBC's Ron Insana and the president of the Florida Teachers Association, Andrew Spar. At least that's on the schedule. Things can change, which is why I generally don't promote it. Hope to see you at tonight's Hangout, everybody. If you didn't get the link, let me know. If you're a paid subscriber, if you're not, sign up now and join us. Stand Up with Pete ESPN.com. Hopefully John Carroll will be there because he's always here with us because he sings us in and out. He wrote the song, Stand Up. And be the change you want to see in the world, folks. Talk to you tomorrow, or maybe see you tonight.
You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt. Down off of your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience. Well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense, and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up and show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.